And now we're ready for our next presenter, and it's Richard Pinnock, and Richard is from South Africa, and I think it's really hard to find a person that has this lifelong experience within energy. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you.
Richard.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Good, I think it's nearly afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and really a pleasure to be here. I think, as you can see, my entire career, which is over many, many years, has been solely in the energy industry. I think probably I have electrons running around my blood system, and it's been a tremendous journey for me, because the energy industry is in such transition. And in fact, you will see that a lot of my career has been in the professional engineering services on a global basis. And I've had 2 tours of duty, if I can call that, in my Peru life in leading the energy industry. And that was from 2003 to 2010, and again from 2016 to the present. And in those 2 periods, there has been tremendous change. And in the years that I did some other exciting things within the Peru group, in between my 2 tours of duty in leading the energy, tremendous change actually took place as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that change, because there's so much facing us. And I think the exciting part for us, and particularly now with the merger of 2 great companies, OF and Peru, on the energy side, we have a great opportunity for us. And I'm going to get a little bit into some of that detail and share that with you in how we're going to be going forward. But before I do that, what I want to do is then just talk a little bit how we are structured and the focus areas that we are currently in. So we are focused in 4 main sectors: the thermal and renewable sector, which is a global organization, and there's a number of segments that we are focusing on in that particular business area or business sector. In the hydro side, which is probably the longest heritage, if we go back in the heritage of our 2 companies, which is probably over 100 years, if we go back to the Peru side and the original birth of where the hydro development started, which was Electrode Engineering of the Swiss company, which is over 100 years old. And here again, we are operating in a global basis. Then we are in the T&D side, and here, which is one of the huge growth potential areas for us due to the energy transition, and I'll come back a little later to that. And then also in the rather niche areas within the nuclear sector, and here, of course, we are mainly in Europe, in a few countries, as you can see, where we focus. And then lastly, we have what we call, and this is a very long history to it, is contracting. This is very specific, focused on a specific type of methodology. And why we keep this separate from the other businesses, because there are higher risks associated with that, and it's a very specific focus, and we choose very carefully where we're adding value, and in particular at the moment is in the bio energy sphere, is supporting clients on their bio program. But what I want to just share with you is the opportunity that the energy sector globally still has for us. And the figures that you see then in billions of US dollars are in an average annual year in the areas that we are operating, the potential that we have. And I think what is really interesting is we have a very little market share. So the potential for us is absolutely huge. And of course, it's how to unlock that in the changing environment. And I'm going to share some of the dynamics with you, what is happening for us. But firstly, as Jonas has said earlier, we are operating on a global basis. And just to give you a flavor for that, In terms of Asia, where our main hub is in Thailand, in Bangkok, although we have a number of offices around the Southeast Asia region, we have around 400 experts. The Nordics for us is the area where we have the biggest footprint at the moment, and especially now with the merger of the two companies. And this is really, really exciting for us because you will see a little later how we're going to capitalize on this in terms of the transition that the energy industry is going through. Then in the EMEA area, we have quite a big footprint in a number of countries where we are operating and focusing on, and then also in Latin America, mainly South America, where we're focusing in terms of the hydro, specifically hydro and thermal. So operating on a global basis. At the moment, and this is 2018, we're around 2,000 people in total. The figures that I showed you there, a little bit more than that. We have grown in the first quarter somewhat. But really, for me, the ultimate challenge in the short term is how I can achieve the 10%. And this is absolutely achievable. In my 2 tours of duty, on the Peru side in energy, when I came in, I had a similar challenge in terms of how can we unlock higher profitability within the energy sector. And absolutely, we are starting from a lower point, but I see no reason why we cannot reach, and in fact you will see that it is one of the key drivers for us in the short term, is to get to the higher end in terms of the profitability level. So this is a big focus for us, and actually the synergies that we have now creating and we are starting to unlock, we're already starting to see that we can move up in terms of that. So this is a very, very key issue for me. As you can see in terms of the size of the business, and based on last year, we are quite balanced, and of course in the contracting, because it's very bespoke and very focused, of course it is smaller. But on our key clients, and this is a selection of the key clients, not in any specific order, you can see that we are operating very local. And this is important. This is very different to the business that Nico said, where a lot of his revenue is coming from about 5 or 6 very key clients, which are global. We have no global client. And what is really interesting, and this is the transition that is taking place, when I first started with the company in '97, we had a couple of global clients. International Power from the UK was one. Vattenfall from Sweden was another. Fortum, in those days it was called IVO in Finland, was another. E.ON was another, where they were on a big expansion drive at that time and buying assets globally. And then in '97, particularly out in Asia, when the Asian crisis, and some of you may remember that first crisis, financial crisis, happened, within less than 18 months, those global clients, in fact, all the ones that I mentioned, got out of the global market and returned home. And today, we're starting now to see, and Fortum is a good example of that from Finland, starting now to look much wider globally and getting, of course, into the renewable energy drive on a global basis. So we operate very locally. Thus, we are having the local presence and to be very close to our clients, and thus the footprint that we have with the platforms to be able to be very close to our client. Like, for example, North Negros Biopower, which is a biopower project in the Philippines. We are very close to that particular client. So this is a different dynamic that we have within the energy sector and the energy division. Today, we are ranked number 5 globally overall in terms of the professional services in the energy sector. But what is really exciting is that in some of our business areas, we are actually ranked even better. And if I look at the T&D today with the joining of forces, previously, both of us individually would have been ranked lower than 10. Now, with coming together in the countries that we are operating, and you saw that earlier, we are now on the ENR, the last report for 2018, we are ranked number 3. And our T&D business is not a global business. So we have great opportunity here, and I'll come back to that, in how can we take this now to the next level. Because if there are one area in the transition that the energy sector is making at the moment, that is in the T&D section. And you'll see that in the complexity, what is evolving now in a few slides. And what, if we just look at here, is we see that if we focus on the D part, the distribution part, which is very local, this is municipality, this is the cities, as Marlon talked about earlier, there is a lot of players, very local players in this game. So here we have a lot more pricing pressure. But where we are very strong and what we can now bring to the markets is in the T side, the transmission side. And one particular expertise area which is really interesting for us is HVDC. And this is going to be, I believe, and we believe, is a massive change. And I'll give you one example. As renewables, as photovoltaic, as wind gets bigger and bigger, which is where we're going to be going, we're creating a lot more intermittent energy. Meaning when the sun goes down, the energy flow stops. So what is happening now here is markets, energy markets are now starting to link. And for example, 2 weeks ago, we got a call from KEPCO in Korea. And this is not a big client of us. We have done some work, but more in their expansion program in the Asia region, to start talking to them about an HVDC link to connect China to Korea. Because they want to move much quicker into the renewable business, get away from fossil business, and to do that, they need to have a big base which the China, massive China energy sector can provide them. And that's where we are going to be able to add so much more value to the transition as it is happening right now. I'll talk more about that later. In hydro, we're number 4. We have some big players who are, and I'm only comparing the international players. We have lots, of course, local players. And of course, here is going to be one of the areas where the interplay in the transition is going to get very, very interesting. And Robert talked a lot about batteries, and absolutely batteries as a storage to deal with the intermittency problem that we have in the industry is going to become a very important issue. But batteries at the current cost in terms of scale is still quite small and still quite expensive. So in order to replace large, let's say, base load generation, which is fossil-based, we need to get another type of battery. And this is where pump storage schemes, where you're pumping water up and down from a top reservoir, from a bottom reservoir, and when you need the energy generation, you run the water from the top reservoir down to the bottom reservoir to replace this. And we're seeing more and more and more of these projects starting to evolve as the transition takes place. And here we are very well positioned for that. And then, of course, where the biggest transition is going to take place is going to be in the thermal area. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So if we then look at our business today, one of the key things for us is to have excellence in project management. Because our business today, on a global basis, is around 90% project-based, and much of that is fixed lump sum contracts, and about 10% service-based. So it is so important for us is to manage the projects that we have across the industry in the various sectors in an excellent way. And here, just a couple of examples of what we have here. But in terms of the service side, and of course we would love to have more service, but the industry, particularly on a global basis, is not associated with the service type approach, is as it is here, particularly in the nuclear sector in Sweden and in the UK, where we have a professional services approach. So this is really, really important for us as we go forward. Now, one project is that I'm just using as an example here, and I'm using it to talk about brave leadership. Jonas mentioned this is one of our values, and to be brave, because in this project, which is the investment value of this project, and it's coming to the end of this year to be completed, is around $4 billion US. And we as AF Peru were brought into this project many years ago to reevaluate and to deal with some of the issues in terms of the project. And through the input that we brought into the project in terms of the environmental impact, particularly in terms of the migration of fish up and down the river, through the work that we did in creating a sustainable project, the client of that investment spent nearly $500 million only to ensure that the fish migration can happen in the way that it should. And I'm really happy, and you can see that this is the fish ladder, which is so important in terms of the project. And in fact, the entry to that fish ladder is here in terms of fish migrating up the river in the season. And in May, and on the 14th of May, the fish ladder was commissioned and put into live situation. And of course, everything was around would the fish start their migration up that ladder. And that was one of the first fishes that actually you can see it is jumping as they normally would do in a rapid or moving up a river into the fish ladder. And that picture is taken right there in terms of that. So this is the contribution that we can bring in this transition through the knowledge. And a lot of the knowledge that we've got is going to be coming from the work that we do, particularly here in the Nordics. And I'll tell you why in the next slide. I'm sure you have seen this picture in many different forms, but I use it a lot because it actually illustrates the challenge that our industry, and in fact the globe, and many of the division leaders have talked a little bit about that. And that is, if we are in the current scenario, and this is where we are, you can see how much fossil fuel currently on a global basis is still part of the energy mix. And particularly in the developing world, be it in Africa and a lot out in Asia, this is still very fundamental to the base. And if we are to meet the COP21, the so-called Paris Agreement that everybody signed, some larger countries pulled out, but if the rest of us are to meet that, we have to get to this scenario. And if you just look at that scenario, for us as a consulting engineering company, a lot of our business, there are very big projects that we are still executing and supporting in this area. So for us, we have to transform ourselves, but more importantly, we have to help our clients through this transformation if we are to achieve this. And that's the exciting part in terms of where we are. But unfortunately, and I think we read this every day, and this was a study that was done by the World Economic Forum. It's in doubt. It's in doubt if we are going to move there. And this is the big challenge for the industry, is how we can move. But there is a bright spot, and in fact, it is quite a really exciting bright spot for us as OF Peru, because inside that, they did a study to identify who is furthest in this transition to sustainability, to affordability, to reliable energy future. And what was really interesting is Sweden number 1, but of course only around 75, so still some work to be done, so not 100%, which still gives us some ability to continue to grow. But the Nordics, and including Switzerland, are leading. And that's quite significant for us, because through the global reach that we have, here is where we can now start taking, if we can become number 1 in the Nordics, which you will see in a minute is our key strategy in the short term, is to take this knowledge. And Nico already mentioned that in his discussion. And I can only vouch for that from many of the clients that I meet all around the world. They read this as well, and they say, what can you bring to us? How can we learn from you guys in the Nordics? Because we know that you are so far ahead. And that is what is very exciting for us as we go forward. Because the energy markets are changing. In the old days, and certainly in my first tour of duty, as I like to call it, and in my previous life, before I joined the Peru Group in 97, it was really straightforward. Integrated utilities from generation to transmission to distribution to the client. But today, and Marlon talked a little bit about it, that's what the future is going to do. It is a totally different ball game in terms of how the energy sector is going to be operating. And I think you can see already the parallels into smart cities. You can see already the parallels into digitalization. And I'm going to come back to that, because this is where I'm really excited from an energy perspective, is to know that we have in Robert's division nearly 1,700 digital specialists. What is also happening here is the changing client base. I think you have all read the big announcement probably about 6 months ago of BP, who was purely in that game, who have said we will become the biggest player to deliver energy to the mobile market, electrical energy to the mobile market in the UK. And they have bought up and are in the process of buying and acquiring all the energy plug-in stations for electrical vehicles in the UK. Totally radical change in terms of their industry. So now what is interesting for us is, with this market change, totally new client bases will start opening up. And here, I know Martin is coming after me, and this is where we need to be very close with Martin and the management consulting on the advisory side, because underlying all of this is you have to get the strategy right. And we will rely very closely with Martin and his experts to help us in bringing our clients through this really, really interesting journey that we're all going to go. And a lot of this is already starting right here in the Nordics, and a lot of this, of elements of this, is already in Sweden. And this is really, really interesting for us. But not only are we seeing that change, but what we're also seeing in the developed world is this move away from very large projects. We're seeing a lot more decentralized, smaller projects, integrated projects. I think we saw from Marlon and I think from Robert's presentation the different clientele that we're focusing on in terms of bioenergy and heat and power, district heating, becoming smaller, bio-based, specifically here in Sweden. Lots smaller projects. However, in the developing world, so in Asia, and I've just shown Asia here, but there are many parts of the world that are still developing, certainly we will see these larger mega projects still being part of the process through this transition. They won't be coal, because coal we are moving away, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But what we are starting to see is because of the intermittency, because in certain countries you don't have the geography where you can put in pump storage schemes to manage the solar PV and the wind, which is expanding very, very quickly, you're then going to start moving to a lot more bigger, what we call floating LNG plants. So getting liquefied natural gas from various parts of the world and supplying these larger projects as the transition moves, as we move to more decentralization. But in some parts, and I can just talk about the Philippines right now, that smaller decentralization is happening immediately. And the projects that I refer to, that North Negros project is a 25 megawatt bioenergy project, and that client has 3 of these bioenergy projects strategically placed on a particular island for one simple reason, is to provide the base load onto that island because of the explosion of solar PV creating an intermittency issue. So a lot of really interesting, exciting things that are happening. But probably for me is the opportunity that digitalization is going to bring to us. And you saw this curve, maybe slightly different. This is just from a Gartner report, 2017 Gartner report, in terms of this disruption on digitalization. And here we sit in the energy area. Huge opportunity for us to move. And a huge opportunity for us as AF Peru to bring to the market new products and services to help this transition. And this, when I heard about our merger, and I then heard about the scale of Robert's business, this is really, really interesting. Because how we can work together up this curve and learn from what has already been done is really going to put us on a different level. I don't know any one of my competitors that will have this capability as we go forward. And there's so much to be done here. And I know, again, here is the interplay between us in the energy division and the management consulting division, because there's a lot of really, really interesting work that's been done here that we can then bring to the markets as we go. So really, really interesting developments for the future. So how does this all play out in terms of the growth? And it's a busy slide. You can read it later. I'm just going to touch on a couple of items. One I've talked a little bit about is what we see as coal investments come to an end. And that is coming much quicker than what we all think due to financing not now being available. We will start moving into these larger facilities. But we are also starting to see, but more on a smaller scale, the return to gas within the European markets, but on a much smaller scale than what we used to see in the, let's say, the early 2000s. Clearly, desalination is going to be a very big issue for us as water scarcity becomes more and more acute. And already what is interesting here is we are involved in work today looking at total renewable desalination. At the moment, In many parts of the world, desalination is driven through thermal generation. And we're looking at how can we create total renewable-based desalination. On the hydro side, this will continue. And the projects will continue. Some will be mega projects, a lot of smaller projects. But where there's great potential is going to be in the rehabilitation. There are so many projects around the world, particularly in the developed world, but not only in the developing world, but not only in the developing world, also in the developed world, where old facilities now need to be rehabilitated. And this will be a growing sector for us within the future. T&D, I've talked about it already, but one issue that is going to be driving this is the whole growth in digitalization and data centers. And data centers use a lot of energy. And here is how to get that energy in the right and the safe way to the data centers. This is going to be driving us. And then, of course, in the nuclear, we are very niche focused. And here, there are two things that are going to be happening. There's a couple of new builds that we will be getting involved in. And, of course, there's the whole decommissioning programs that is only going to be starting as we go forward, particularly in the European side. And here, we're already involved in that from an AFPERO point of view here in Sweden. And that knowledge that we're going to be gaining as we move forward, because for sure, we're going to be seeing the decommissioning, as we know, has already been decided within Germany and Switzerland, where we are very well positioned. So lots of opportunity for us as the industry transforms. So taking all this into account, clearly we're in a major transition towards the renewables. Intermittency is going to be driving many things, particularly the storage parts. And there's already a lot of work that is being done here. And for us, of course, is on the hydro side, is pump storage is becoming bigger and bigger opportunities for us. But one of the things which I have noticed in the industry, and I come out of my first part of my career, was in the operations and the maintenance of power facilities. And as I talk to many clients all around the world, the same message is coming through. Because younger people are coming in, they are not looking for a job for life. And I'm a perfect example of that. I've worked for 2 big companies in my entire career. Today, that's not happening. One particular client in the Far East, I won't mention who they are extremely worried about this. They have a training program called the 5-star training program. It takes 5 years. For every 20 young graduates which they choose to get onto that program, after 5 years, 2 stay. Because the rest of the industry knows that if on that CV they have this company's 5-star program on their CV, they are extremely marketable. And they are worried that within the next 15 years, many of the people that have been on their facilities and operating their facilities are going to retire. And then you're going to create this massive gap of knowledge. And this is a big opportunity for us, because the only way we're going to solve that is going to be through digital products, AI, knowledge learning, etc. So this is going to be really interesting for us. And I'm sure in many other industries, the same phenomena is going to be there as we go. So our key strategy, focus areas in the short term, is to drive our EBIT margin to the top of the corridor. That's my biggest focus at the moment, is to get us back to where we are. I want to become number 1. We want to become number 1 in the Nordics. And you can clearly see the reason why. Because if we are number 1 in the Nordics, we are already so far in the transition process. How can we take that to the next level? How can we bring that to all our clients in the developing world? We would like to be number 3. We're number 5 today. We would like to come to number 3. We would like to change our business, which is around 90 or 92%, depending how we focus it, from CapEx to 30% OpEx. to really get further and further into the OpEx side. And it is similar to what my colleagues have talked about. And of course, is how we can go up this digital process in products and how we can work together to get to that. So just very quickly, a couple of examples of how we can go to the next level. And I'm only going to talk about this one. We have a huge potential with a big footprint here already in the Nordics. We already seen where we are in terms of the transition in the Nordics, Sweden leading. How, if we can become number one, how we can then take this through our platform to support our clients globally and make that transition and support the transition. So lastly, to sum up, we have a huge potential in terms of our people. We have over 2,000 people globally. We have a footprint that is global. We operate locally with platforms. So we are very close to our clients. We have extensive sector knowledge, and that only has increased with the joining of forces. And of course, one of the key points for us is how we can offer services on the full life cycle. From the strategy side, working very closely with our energy management consulting side, all the way through to the O&M side and the decommissioning. And this is very key for us. And probably the most important for us, ultimately, is to take the Nordic know-how through the transition that we already are here to the developing world and to our global clients. That will be making the difference. Thank you.